Professor Stephen Friedman joins us for more on that story. Professor Friedman, very good to have you on the show today. Snooki Zikalala of the Veterans League saying a few minutes before this interview that what has happened is unfortunate. When you look at the context that has led us here, is it really?
Well, I suppose, Kathy, it depends on what perspective you take. I think a lot of people will find it quite fortunate. I think Snooki Zikalala is kind of obliged to say that because you can't really say, well, isn't it great news that somebody's been expelled from the ANC? But clearly to describe Ace Magashule as controversial is an understatement. And there are a great many people who will take the opposite view, who will say, well, the ANC is better off without it.
Why do you think Mr. Magashule ignored the internal processes of the ANC? Because I think a strong case can be made that the moment he decided to do that, there was no other outcome because he simply wasn't engaging.
Yeah, no, he clearly decided a while ago that he was going to be expelled, that he accepted that, and that he was going to move on. Because as you correctly say, if he hadn't have done that, then he would have challenged the process, or at least answered. Incidentally, I think it's highly unlikely that he will appeal because he's shown no interest in engaging with the process up to now. Look, one assumes that, we know that the ANC is divided factionally. He's going to say that this is an attempt by one faction to remove him because he's part of the other faction. And he's presumably decided that nothing he would say to the other faction would be listened to. And therefore, at some point, I would expect him to say, well, I didn't answer any of this because I knew these people were biased against me. And as long as they're in charge, I'm not welcome in the ANC. So I think it was, in a sense, part of his way of, as he would put it, not giving any legitimacy to the process because then he would be saying that he could get a fair hearing from an ANC controlled by the other faction.
Professor Friedman, speaking about factions, right, we can argue that even right up to Nasrec, there was, the other faction of the ANC, at least the one that Mr. Magashule would have associated himself, that was thought to have quite a sway in the organization. When we look at today's outcome, I mean, to what extent would you say that these factions are still pulling in the different directions, but also have the kind of support within the organization to make things happen?
Yeah, that's a very important question, obviously. Let me put it to you this way. If we think back to the ANC reality of 2017 at Nasrec, where you had a strong faction supporting former President Zuma and a strong faction supporting now President Ramaphosa, those days are over in the sense that long before Ace Magashule was expelled, the faction of which he's part has been in decline. Bear in mind that if you look at the ANC National Executive, which is the highest decision-making body between conferences, his faction had a minority on the NEC, quite a strong majority for the other faction, and they only have one or two cabinet ministers left. So in that sense, that kind of factionalism has gone. But bear in mind also that if we go back to the ANC conference last year, with the exception of Mr. Ramaphosa himself, most of the people who were elected by very small majorities. And that tells you that you're still dealing with a deeply divided ANC. So the divisions remain. But if you want to put it, the faction that Mr. Magashule is part of is really in disarray at the moment. Whether they'll come back and unite under somebody else, we need to see. But certainly, although there are a lot of people who see things the same way as he does, they really don't have much clout within the organization at the moment. Are
you expecting any kind of momentum to follow on from here? Because while the ANC can sort of look at this Magashule matter and pride itself in having followed its own internal process, we know that there are many leaders who need to undergo processes, whether they've been recommendations by the Integrity Commission that are sort of still standing, not much happening in that regard? I mean, does the signal a turning of the tide?
Look, the only option he's got really is to go to court. And I don't want to anticipate what a court would say, but I would be extremely surprised if any court took an action by him terribly seriously on this issue, because as we said at the beginning, he's had opportunities to challenge this through the processes. He hasn't, and if it goes to court, the other side's simply going to say, well, we gave him opportunities. They're talking now about the opportunity to appeal, and he didn't take the opportunities. And I think most courts, the courts are unlikely to be sympathetic to that. Of course, the big question now is what is he going to do politically? I certainly don't expect him to go meekly into retirement. I'm sure, he's been a politician his whole life. I'm sure that he will be looking for opportunities, and the opportunities either to join an existing party, and I mean, obvious candidates would be the EFF and possibly the ATM, or to start something of his own. If that were to happen, I don't see that gaining much traction. There's a great deal of romanticism around this, etc. But bear in mind that during the time that Ace Magashule ran the Free State province, and the ANC vote in that province declined from about 80% to 60%, down to 50% in the last local elections. So you're not exactly dealing with somebody who had great voter support when he was in charge. And I suspect that probably his best bet at the moment is to link up with one of the existing parties, join the EFF or the ATM, because I don't see him getting much traction if he starts a party of his own.
All right. I guess we could say that will be part of the floor crossing season that will continue ahead of the national elections next year. Professor Friedman, always a pleasure. Thank you.